Welcome to Living Lit, where conversations spark inspiration to live in truth. Journey together with us to explore what it means to live a liturgical life and walk in the truth of our faith. Let's instill a culture in our hearts, homes, families, and world, living a life cooperating with and walking alongside our Lord. I'm Robyn Brueggemann. Let's be a light, share the light, shine the light, and live lit. In the studio with me today, I have my friend Jodi Reel, who is a director for the St. John the Baptist Pastorate in Sioux Falls, South Dakota for Catechesis of the Good Shepherd. And I know many of you have seen or heard about Catechesis of the Good Shepherd, otherwise known as CGS, but there are many of you who are like, what is that? You might see it in your bulletin, maybe it's offered in your parish, or maybe you've heard of it at another parish, and you're just wondering, what is that all about? Well, I've invited Jodi in to come and talk to us about Catechesis of the Good Shepherd and kind of give us an idea of what goes on inside the program. So Jodi, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So will you introduce yourself, kind of a little bit about you, and then kind of tell us how you got involved in Catechesis of the Good Shepherd?
Sure. Well, my name is Jodi. I've been a member of St. Lambert Parish for 21 years. And I got involved with the CGS program when we first started it back in 2015. It was actually 2014 when we first were introduced to it, and we were asked by the pastor at the time, like, hey, would you be interested in getting trained so we could have this at our parish as, an optional thing. So that's where it started. But I am been married for 27 years, and my husband and I have 6 children. 4 of them now are college-aged, and we have 2 left at home. So, wow. I know.
You're so close to having them.
3.
That's crazy, isn't it?
I know. Number 4 graduates next month, and then it's crazy.
Awesome. So Jodi and I know each other through homeschooling world. So we've known each other for quite a few years, and some of our kids line up in age and are friends and stuff. And then now we're in the same pastorate. So you're at St. Lambert's, I'm at St. Therese. So now we've been clumped together even closer through our church situation and stuff. And so will you tell people, what is Catechesis of the Good Shepherd? To people who have not heard of it, or maybe they've heard of it, but they're just still kind of fuzzy. Yeah. What is it?
It's a religious ed program for pre-K through 6th grade that uses Montessori principles to deliver catechesis. So it takes place in an atrium, which is a special prayer room, specially designed for the age group, or the child, we would say, on the developmental plane. So we break them up into age groups. So we have the 3 to 6th grade atrium, which we call level 1, because all those children are in the same plane of development.
So 3 to 6-year-olds?
3 to 6-year-olds,
okay.
Yep. And then a level 2, which would be in a second atrium, or something. But in a second atrium would be the level 2, and then you would have your 6 to 9-year-old children, because they're all on the same age, the same developmental plane. And then in level 3, in a third atrium, you would have your 9 to 12-year-olds. So, okay. And we have all 3 levels at St. John the Baptist Pastorate across 2 buildings, and we're building a Spanish atrium thanks to a grant this summer, so we're excited.
Awesome. So give us an idea. So you said an atrium, because many people will hear atrium, like it's atrium, like my kids would refer to it. My little Benedict, who did CGS, called it atrium time. It's time to go to atrium. So that is a set apart space, prayerful space, then that is set apart. What does the atrium look like? If someone were to go into the atrium, what would they see? Because it's very different than going into a classroom setting.
Correct. It's not a classroom at all. We would say that. My sister, the first time she saw it, she said, oh, it's like a Catholic children's museum.
It is, actually. That's a good way to put it. That's funny.
She said, because what you are going to see is all the materials that the children get to use to and teach them to pray. So you will see a raised map of Israel where they get to identify Nazareth and Bethlehem and Jerusalem. You will get to see a model of Jerusalem where they get to move the buildings around and learn about the important places that were in Jesus' time. You will get to see, so this would all be level 1, you would get to see houses that contained all the infancy narratives, from the Annunciation to the Visitation to Adoration of the Shepherds and the birth of Christ, the Magi, the presentation in the temple and the flight into Egypt. And you would see the Good Shepherd, which is the cornerstone of level 1, a prayer center. You would see a model altar where they could set up all the articles of the Mass as they learn, what is each one of these items called and why is it so important. And then we have what we call the gestures area, where they get to learn the gestures of the Mass, the gestures that Father uses at the moment of consecration, where we tell them the wine and the bread become the body and blood of the Good Shepherd.
Mm-hmm. And you also have, so it's called works, like when a child is working with the materials in the atrium, that is a work. And that's the wording that is used in there is very different too. Being trained in level 1 also, that was something you need to, your brain needs to click with early on, that the wording, we're working with things. We're not playing with things. We are working with the materials. So when we have like 3 and 4-year-olds entering into the atrium, their works in the beginning, do you want to give some ideas of what that might look like if you have like a younger kiddo coming in?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and work is essential because you were going to use it all the way through level 3. I'll tell you why in a little bit. So when they first come in, we want to get them used to working within the room. So we call it freedom within limits. So you have the freedom to choose to work with things that you have been presented or taught. And having said that, the environment is perfectly set up. So there are only the things in there that you want them to work with, right? Mm-hmm. So there aren't extraneous things that would distract them from prayer or contemplation or the doctrinal content that we are trying to teach. Mm-hmm. So sometimes, you could see a child, like I said, setting up the model altar. You can see when they get to pray with the parable of the mustard seed, they get to actually hold a real mustard seed from the land of Israel, right? Mm-hmm. When they work with the precious pearl, they get to work with the merchant and the pearl and his other pearls in his house. So it aids in their own Lectio Divina. Mm-hmm. And so because first and foremost with Catechesis of the Good Shepherd, we're trying to teach prayer and we're trying to teach relationship. So level 1 is all about receiving the love of the Father and delighting in that love. And then in order to teach them to contemplate well, we also have what we call practical life. So it might look interesting. You come in and you think, this is a room for catechesis, and they're pouring water or walking on a line or working with beans. And you're thinking, what are they doing?
Yeah.
Well, it's twofold. Number one, you can't really contemplate well and pray well if you can't control your body. So they are learning how to slow down, how to complete work, and how to think well in silence. But the other half of it is this preparation for further work. So if I can't pour well, when they go over to the gestures table to prepare the chalice with wine and water, I mean, if you don't want your atrium to smell like a bar, you want them to perfect pouring, right?
Yeah.
So it does. And if you want them to fold the corporal well over at the model altar, they have to know how to fold. So there's 2 hidden meanings to both of, to the practical life. It has 2 aspects.
Yeah. So, and I think what people may not know if they've not been in an atrium is that everything in there is made for children. So like the Mass the set that they can work with is not the same size as we see at Mass that Father would use. They're smaller, so they can learn to control them, and they're working with them at their right. It's just developmentally, I suppose, just fitting. It's perfect because it's like it's meant like for their size, for their hands. And also what is really neat about inside the atrium is how very often the atrium is meant to kind of reflect the look of the parish. And so I've been in St. Lambert's. It's been a while since I've been in there. But you guys have, if you were to look in the worship area and towards the altar at St. Lambert's, and then you go into the atrium, you're going to be like, oh my goodness, it's a miniature. It's like a miniature church that we're in. And that's so neat because the kids, I think, are then making that connection, right? There's so many things going on in atrium between the works and what they're being presented, but also those little things that they're thinking, oh, wait a second. Yeah. This is like church. I'm learning what's going on at Mass. And it's so beautiful. Now, you mentioned there's silence, and that is very different than a classroom setting, but it's so beautiful. So during atrium time, when you're in the atrium, it's silent. And then as a catechist, you are sitting with like maybe a child one-on-one, or maybe you have a little group of them and you're doing a presentation, right? Whether it's teaching that work reading a parable, right? Scripture.
Correct.
And so other than the catechist or an assistant presenting or talking quietly with that child or those children, it's very quiet in there, but it's beautiful. And I was amazed at how quickly children can enter into that.
Yeah, and they love it.
Isn't it amazing?
Yeah,
like, because you'd think they would be like, what do I? And I mean, a little bit there is, because no one's used to silence anymore in today's world. But you can tell how much they even appreciate that. Even children, they're craving the silence that us adults are craving, or probably should be craving if we're not. So that's so beautiful to see in the atrium. And I just love how everything, so like the model altar and stuff, it's built for their level. It's not like they're up trying to be up at an altar like this to, do that work. It's all their level. It's so beautiful for them to just enter into that.
It is, yeah. And one of the, indirect aims of all of it is greater participation in the liturgy, right? So that when they go to Mass and they see Father, they'll say, he has the paten, he has the chalice, where's the ciborium, and they get excited.
And one of the other works is the vestments, right? Mm-hmm. So they're paying attention to, Father is wearing green, he's wearing rose, he's wearing white. They know, we've changed seasons. I remember when my Benedict was in CGS as a young kiddo, he was all on top of that. Okay, it's a new season. It's a new liturgical season because it's green now. Everything is green, and they're noticing even the candles, right? So there's some work with some candles sometimes in the atrium, so they're learning that. And even so you're talking about like the practical works. I remember, so it's pouring. You start with pouring water, right?
Yeah. You start with pouring rice.
Or rice, and then there's like some bean things, and then the water. And I remember thinking, because, during training, thinking, that's so basic, but it's so interesting, right? But then when my youngest was in CGS and he was starting to do that, he was at the point at home where we were not letting him pour his own juice or milk. He probably could have been, but not liking spills. I'm like, we're not going there. But then seeing that he had that in the atrium, I was like, huh. And he had the confidence to pour, and I also had the confidence to let him pour, because I knew he was doing that work in the atrium, which was preparing him for even just things outside of that. So yes, it's catechetical, but they're also just learning these other things and ways to go about them in such a different demeanor kind of, or something.
Yeah, and there's an intentionality to it, right?
Yeah.
So Maria Montessori said that, all of her education was based off of human development. So she spent her lifetime studying human development and what would be the best way to educate the human. And that's when she discovered the 4 planes of development. And so when they asked Sofia Cavalletti and Gianna Gobi to create, a religious program, which wasn't their original goal, but they did, it was help me to know God by myself. So help me to know him. So in the atrium, everything isn't just about, let me show you, let me tell you, right? Because that only engages the first moment of learning. That's just, I have heard what you said and I can regurgitate it, but I don't own it, right? But the second moment of learning, that receptive part where I have to take it and I have to work with it, and I have to learn how it works and how to make it work for myself, then it becomes an integral part of me. So if that's important for regular education, how much more important is it in religious education, when really the whole goal is to know God, right? And so we don't just know things about him, but we are going to know him, because we are going to give you this 2-hour opportunity to sit with him, to pray with him, to hear his word, to see his liturgy, to really embrace all of him, and they really do come to know God, and it's noticeable in their joy and in their responses.
It is. I feel like it's a program that it pulls so many important things together, like you say, because, they're being catechized in a way, right? And
Absolutely,
And then they're learning about the Mass, but most importantly, then learning to be in this relationship with the Lord, that they are coming to, like you say, through the ways, the different levels of them learning and receiving that at just these perfect times too, right? In their development, that they're able to really just have the Lord, it just becomes a part of them in such a unique and different way. And then, like you said, they're learning that prayer aspect of it too. It's so beautiful. CGS is so amazing. So you mentioned how Maria Cavalletti started it.
Mm-hmm.
She from Italy? Or no, I'm trying to remember, right?
Yep, no, Sofia Cavalletti, she's from Italy. She's actually a biblical scholar and doctor. And then she was approached by a gal she knew that said, I really would like you to help me teach my children catechism. And Sofia thought, well, I don't really know anything about the child, and I don't know, but I'll try it. And what she saw, what she called the religious potential of the child, she said was amazing, because they really were tuned in to hear the voice of God. And so she enlisted a gal she knew, Gianna Gobi, who is a Montessori expert, to help her. And they spent 10 years researching.
Wow,
so,
I did not remember that. That's a long time.
10 years trying to develop this and what spoke most to the child at each plane of development. So in level 1, we've already mentioned, its cornerstone is the Good Shepherd, the parable of the Good Shepherd, and we also have the Eucharistic presence of the Good Shepherd, how he feeds his sheep and how he cares for his sheep. So the children are just receiving the love of the Father and delighting it. When they move on to level 2, they're now developing a moral sense. So now the cornerstone becomes the true vine. What is my response to the love of the Father that I have received? How do I remain well? So then we begin to introduce moral parables, such as the Good Samaritan, the insistent friend, and the Pharisee and the tax collector. We teach them to examine their conscience not from the 10 Commandments, which are unrelatable to them in a way. I haven't killed anybody. I don't even know what adultery is, so I think I'm good, right? And so we've taken what we call the maxims of Jesus. So the maxims we pulled primarily from the Sermon on the Mount. By we, I mean Sofia Cavalletti and Gianna Gobi, who have tested this, because those were tangible ways that they could say, oh yeah, if I live this, then I am remaining well. And why does God want me to remain well? So I can be filled with his joy, right? And then when they get to level 3, it's missionary discipleship. So the cornerstone is the plan of God and my place in it. So they were introduced in a small way to salvation history in level 2. We teach them creation, redemption, parousia, and the order of creation and how God came to give us gifts. But in level 3, they deep dive into the plan of God. Right? What is his plan? What was his plan for all of creation? And then they start to think, well, how do I fit into this plan? So their cornerstone work is, what is my place in the plan of God? What is he calling me to do? So we introduce things like the workers in the vineyard and the talents and confirmation. And, we've had level 3 there. I think this is our 4th year. And we have every year, we have more and more kids requesting confirmation because they understand so well who they are and what they were made for, right? And they would love that gift because they would love to share it with others. So it's this beautiful culmination. And I remember the first year we did it, there was, the kids are so much more intelligent than we are sometimes. They're quick to put things together. And we were halfway through the year, one little girl who had been in our atrium since level 1, all of a sudden she stopped and she went, oh, Miss Jodi. I said, what? And she goes, I know why you call it work now, because we all have a work in the kingdom. And she just got so excited. I'm going to go find my work in the kingdom.
Oh,
yeah.
So beautiful.
Yeah.
I know you have experienced a lot because you have been a catechist for a while.
Yeah.
And
over
then
a decade.
On to be the director of the program there. Mm-hmm. What are some other stories that you have experienced? I know you've witnessed several, but also from your other catechists have heard. So what are some other stories that maybe come to your mind of that you were like, okay, see, this is genuine. This is the good thing. The first time was I was presenting the Good Shepherd to a 3-year-old, mind you. So we read it, and they get to move the sheep, and they get to move the shepherd. And at the end, I looked at him and I said, what could we say to our Good Shepherd? And he picked up the statue of the Good Shepherd, and he walked over to the model tabernacle and put him inside and shut the door. But that was, he was like, that is him. He is there in the tabernacle. And he would genuflect, and he knew. That was a 3-year-old. Making that connection. That is our same Lord. wow,
that
he's a good
he
shepherd,
knew.
but he is
He knew.
present in
Yeah.
the Eucharist.
You didn't have to.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And I have another little girl we have. So right next to the Good Shepherd is the Eucharistic presence. So you can set up a little mini altar with the chalice and the paten with the bread on it. And she will pick up this little tiny paten and bread, and she will kiss it and she will hug it and she goes, "My Jesus." And then she'll put him down and keep walking. So they really, yeah. Right.
Wow. As you're talking here, I'm reminded that for our listeners to the podcast right now, we are going to connect some videos or both probably videos and pictures. So you may want to watch this on YouTube if you're like, what are they talking about? She has holding up a statue. There are these works. So we will connect some pictures to give people an idea because it is so much hands-on and visual things that you're experiencing in the atrium. So when you see some pictures or videos, you'll be like, oh, okay, that makes sense.
That's what she's talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I'm not sure if I can say this, if anybody's listening or watching this and has little kids, plug their ears, right? But what was big for me in the beginning was, as a mom, I was so quick to be like, Jesus is our good shepherd. Like, you read it in books, and it's in like every little kid book, right? Jesus is our good shepherd. And so we taught that to the kids growing up. But then when I went through training, where they talk about how much more of like meaningful and everything that's just crazy awesome when the child makes that discovery themselves of Jesus being the good shepherd, right? So do you want to talk into that, or do we feel like we want to keep that?
And Jesus tells us, "I am the good shepherd." So that isn't a secret. I mean, the parables.
Right. I should rephrase that. Not secret.
I am the good shepherd.
Yeah. But in the atrium,
but we don't tell them they're the sheep. We don't tell them they're the sheep.
Okay, so I had that worded backwards.
Nope, you're okay. Yeah,
Okay,
we don't
sorry.
tell them they're the sheep. We want them to discover it.
Okay, see, I was sorry.
So
I
it's
phrased
this
that
whole
backwards.
education to wonder, right? So we ask them these wondering questions, but basically our questions are stepping stones leading to the doctrinal content we want them to understand.
Yeah.
But we want them to unwrap it and own it for themselves.
Right.
So we'll say, "I wonder about those sheep," right?
Yeah.
And then when they discover they are the sheep, the joy, like they just start jumping and they hug the sheep, and I'm the sheep and my sister's the sheep, and yeah.
So to give someone just kind of a quick idea of what that would be like. So that particular presentation, you have like the statue or like some are like wooden, I think even like a Jesus as the good shepherd, where you would look at him and go, okay, that's the good shepherd. And then there's a bunch of sheep, like wood sort of sheep, right?
Yeah.
And then like on like this grassy sort of area
with a fold. Don't forget the fold.
I don't, it's been so long since I've had training.
It has to have a fold.
So
it's the church.
Will you explain
Don't tell your
that?
children if you're listening.
Yeah, plug the kids' ears. But do you want to explain that real quick so people have an idea?
Yeah, so it's multi-leveled for sure. So, all the sheep are in this fold on this green grass. And as you read the parable, the Good Shepherd calls them out. He calls them by name. And you're getting them used to this because, okay, where were you named? Well, you were named at baptism. Like they're going to start to connect it to all the works in the atrium. But he calls them by name. Well, how do you think they recognized his voice? How do they know his voice from a stranger's voice? Where do you think he's calling them to? Why do you think they live in a fold? And then as they get older, what do you think the fold is? Where, if we are the sheep, what is our fold? What is our food, right? What is you want to feed us? Leading them all to that Eucharistic presence, to the church as the fold, to, just the love of the Good Shepherd and everything that he has given. And it's that same way for any presentation, right? And that parable has a pretty straightforward meaning, but there are others that don't, that grow with the child, right? So in the parable of the pearl of great price, right, in level 1, we call it the precious pearl. And I had one kid, so it has a house, it has the merchant, it has all the pearls he's collected over his lifetime, and then that one precious one that he has to go in search of. And there's a great to-do made out of the search. And then when does he find it? What does it fill him with? It fills him with joy, and so he goes and sells everything. And I had one kid, after praying with it for a while, take everything off of his work rug. So they get to work on the floor by rolling out work mats. And he took everything off except the merchant and the precious pearl. I said, "Oh, can you tell me about your work?" He said, "Mrs. Reel, he has everything he needs." So he had taken Psalm 23, and he had taken the precious pearl, and he had synthesized it. And I said, "Oh, I wonder what that is like." And he said, "It is so joyful, his heart glows." So, yeah.
I just love that. So, yeah, it's amazing what kids are capable of taking in and processing and even able to communicate that out. like with this.
For
You know,
sure.
it's so amazing.
For sure.
And that was really, even as a mom of many, I think I did not give my kids enough freedom growing up, even to not be like, oh, it's this, blah, blah, blah. Or, you know, anything, oh, you know, just like to rush past and maybe not let them, I don't know, does that make sense? Kind of like.
It does.
You know,
it does, because a relationship with God takes time. It takes our whole life, right? And where else do you get the space to do that?
Yeah.
You know, except there. You know, and, you know, teaching all those truths. And in level 3, you know, I've had many moments there too, but we were reading the parable of the prodigal son. And this time we were focusing on the older son. And I said, let's just ponder that older son for a minute. You know, what are you noticing about him? And it was one kid who said, you know, he said he was given all that inheritance and he didn't do anything with it. It's just like the parable of the talents. So they start to, like, you know, and he said, and look how he doesn't have that joy because he didn't use his gifts.
Yeah.
You know, and that's also the parable we take to confirmation then. Well, what gifts have you received, and are you going to bury them? Are you going to, you know, make trade with them? What are you going to do? So he's like, yeah, if he had just used those gifts, he would have been so much happier. So I think, they really get it.
So beautiful. So beautiful. So you've really talked into, you know, it's Montessori-based, which makes it, that's a very obvious difference from the traditional religious ed. But is there anything else that you would want to mention as to how it's so different?
It's so different.
It's not even apples to apples.
It's not apples to apples, because it teaches prayer first. So of the 4 pillars of the catechism, right, prayer comes 4. And I remember listening to the Catechism of the Year podcast with Father Mike Schmitz, and Sister Miriam Heidland was on there for the 4th pillar. And Sister Miriam says, she said, really, the 4th pillar prayer should be the first prayer, because if you don't have prayer and relationship, everything else is rules without love. And she said, and then she mentioned Catechesis of the Good Shepherd, and she said, and that is why Catechesis of the Good Shepherd is so successful, because it is based on human development, and it starts with prayer and relationship first before. So you notice we are going to delight in this love. So if I have a new kid coming to me in level 2 or 3, we are going to start with delight. Do you know the Father? Well, let's talk about that vine grower. Let's talk about, you know, that vine. Do you know him before I can get into how do we love him? And then last is how do we serve him? But it really comes back to I have to know him first. And I think CGS really takes the time to do that.
Yeah. I wish there was an adult program.
You know,
because when I went through training, even though it was like at a kid level, it was amazing. Like it's so crazy amazing to sit through, and your heart is just stirred and moved, and you're making these connections in our faith. And I think it's important for people to, like, clearly, I think if anybody's listening, they're going to see this is very Catholic. It is so Catholic.
Yeah.
And so, because I think there's this, like, okay, you're doing what? You have this Montessori stuff, but it is so absolutely right on with our faith, with our Catholic Church.
Yeah. Maria Montessori was Catholic. Sophia was a biblical scholar, Catholic. It was made for the church. Yeah.
Totally sound. So I was just thinking, as you were talking about Sophia Cavalletti, that she has a couple books, right? If I remember,
she has several books,
but a couple. Like, I know I own a couple that really talk about CGS.
Yeah, so there's a whole set. So if you go to CGS USA, they have a closet there that has all the books that go with the program. Yep. So if you want to read Sophia's writings, they're there, but also Gianna Gobi talking about, you know, listening to God with children and how to educate to wonder, right? And then you can also find a book, Life in the Vine, which has the whole scope and sequence of the whole program. So it says, here's what, you know, this doctrinal content looks like in level 1, here's what this doctrinal content looks like in level 2, and here's what it looks like in 3. So you can kind of get a feel for what the whole thing is. Because in level 3, they make their own missal. Their own Roman missal. So they have to figure out what every prayer of the Mass is, what's a proper, what's not a proper, why is it a proper, how do I choose that proper? Wow. And then they're given cards, and they're all mixed up. And it has to involve your own work in order to internalize this.
Wow.
And so they'll put the cards out for each moment, you know, for each section of the Mass. So if it's Liturgy of the Word, they have to put it all in order, and then they hand copy it into their own missal. And we teach them illumination as a way to pray with Scripture. So sometimes they'll want to illuminate their missal. And then they use the real missal. So we have a Roman missal in there that they check their work against.
So beautiful. Yeah. So I will put a link to those books because I remember when we had to read through them during training, I remember thinking, oh my goodness, there's so much useful information here just as a mom and mothering and different ways to just be more intentional with the faith. So I think even for someone who's not necessarily going to do CGS or they don't have it right now accessible to them, I think they're just fantastic books to read and just get to understand more. So to people that are listening, they're thinking, oh my goodness, I want this at my parish. Like, I want to know more. Where would you send them to like get more information?
I would tell them to call somebody who has it. It is so important to see it.
Yeah. So like make a visit.
Yeah, make a visit.
Okay.
Find out who in my area has this. I'm going to go check it out and I'm going to talk to them.
So is there a way like on the CGS site or anything to know where the closest
on the site,
one is?
Okay. They do have, people can submit, their atriums and where they are. So you can do that if you don't think there is any in your area. And it's kind of fun. And I'm trying to think on that website if it just contains stuff in North America because, CGS is in over 65 countries.
Yeah, that's amazing.
So you can find them everywhere. But
so take a field trip.
Figure out, what it looks like for yourself. Talk to somebody. Like, what are the steps to get this started? Obviously, you're going to have to go talk to your pastor, whoever is in charge and say, I have noticed this, I have this program, I have a willingness to bring this here. And then you will need to get trained. And so I wouldn't start anything until you or somebody who is going to do it with you has been trained.
Right.
Because it is vital that you know what you're doing before you start building materials because, again, they are extremely intentional. They know exactly what doctrinal content they're trying to teach the children. And anything, that is extrafluous will just distract them from the real work or the real lesson that we're trying to teach.
So in the atrium, like you mentioned, you need to be trained. So the catechist is what we would think of as like the teacher, but they're called the catechist.
Yeah.
That is someone who's been through all of the training.
So a level 1 catechist has 90 hours of training.
Is that what it is? Wow.
Yeah. A level 2 catechist
so
has to be a level 1 catechist first, and they have an additional 90 hours of training. So if you walk into a level 2 room, your catechist has 180 hours of training. And then a level 3 catechist needs 120 hours on top of the 180 they've already received. So a level 3 catechist has 300 hours of training.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you can be very comfortable and confident sending your children to this program because the catechists are trained and right on. And they are people who love the program and they love children and they love teaching the faith and teaching the love of the Lord.
Yes.
So that's also something that's so beautiful because to someone who's not loving CGS and the whole idea of it, they're not going to be a catechist.
No.
So you can be comfortable knowing that whoever's in there with your kids, they are so good. And then you have an assistant.
Yes.
So do you want to tell people what an assistant would look like and that
so
it's not as many hours?
No, it's not as many hours. So an assistant, I just, like in our own pastorate, I just have an assistant training. A one-day training for an assistant. So I want to teach them what is Montessori principles and what is your role. Because an assistant is really vital because they steer the ship. Because as the catechist, I am helping the child contemplate Scripture. I can't be interrupted because I'm praying with the child through this and leading them and helping them deep dive into this. And so it is the assistant's responsibility to make sure that that's protected, right? So they have to make sure that they handle all the other things in the room. Are the children working like they should? Are they remaining relatively quiet? Do they need to use the bathroom? Do they need their candles lit? Do they, need help with this? Did someone have a spill and can't find the towel? So they are handling all of those things just so that the catechist can then sit and contemplate the Scripture with the child and teach them.
Yeah. But it's very doable. So someone, yes, there's some training involved, but it's not major. And
a lot of catechists start as assistants. They're like, well, I'm not trained, but I'll be an assistant. I can show up for 2 hours a week.
Yeah.
And they usually wind up falling in love. And next thing you know, they're being trained. So
yeah. So that's something to keep in mind to people that want this at their parish, if that's kind of what is needed. I mean, there's lots. But if the Lord wants it, he's going to make it happen. So what are some of the benefits for families whose children participate in CGS?
And a little child shall lead them. Their children. I have so many parents coming to me and saying, I want what my child has, right? I cannot believe the depth of knowledge they have about the faith. I cannot believe how well they speak of God and of Jesus, like they have conversations with him and they know him. I had one dad that was noticing at their family dinner table, he had posed a question, about the faith, and the oldest daughter, who had never had CGS, just rattled off like a list, totally disinterested. And his younger two, who had had CGS and were currently in CGS, he said, came alive, and all of a sudden they sat up, and with joy they were like, well, this, and God this, and I heard this, and this is what we should be doing. And he said, next thing I know, and they were first and third grade at the time, they were getting into a theological argument that he didn't even quite understand, so he had to go get the catechism and start looking stuff up to try to help them, because they knew more theology than he did. And he watched his oldest daughter sit there totally disinterested, and for the first time it clicked with him. He was like, oh, she knows about God. They know him. And I want to know him too. So then he started doing his own reading and listening to Catholic radio. And he was like, I need to keep up with my kids. We have seen families return to the Mass. We have seen families return to the sacrament of reconciliation. It's been pretty amazing,
Do you have advice for people? Not advice, encouragement, or something that if you could say to the parents who have children in CGS, I didn't prep you for this question, but I think it'll be good, to people that have kids in CGS and maybe they attend Mass all the time, maybe they don't, but it's important for them to have their kids catechized. Is there something that you wish parents knew or that you could say to them that would help kind of bridge this, between CGS to home? Does that make sense, kind of?
Yeah, it does. I wish they knew how critically important and vital living liturgically was. I wish they knew that getting up and praying a morning offering together as a family, or reading the gospel and just asking, what did you hear? Taking your children to confession with you, whether they're able to go or not, so they can see you go. Taking them to adoration, even if it's for 20 minutes and you can't make it. And we do have a family hour at St. John the Baptist on Thursdays. If you feel nervous that your children might, quote unquote, make noise, but it's more important that they're there than they're quiet, right? Mm-hmm. How important it is to have a family prayer center and to change those liturgical seasons out so the kids know, when I see green, I know I'm supposed to be growing closer and growing in my faith. When I see purple, I know I'm supposed to be preparing for the parousia, which the children know parousia, but many people are like, what is that? It's the second coming. I really need to be prepared for when Jesus comes, right? Whether it's at my death or at the parousia, I need to be, when they see white, they know how to celebrate. So I think that's vital. Let them set up their own prayer center, use it as a family, read good books, and just talk about them. I think just living your faith that way. My daughter went off to college, and there was a whole group of her friends that got together to make waffles because it was the Ascension. Yeah, and why would they remember that? Because their whole childhood, this is what you do, right?
Yeah, which is a traditional thing that's done on Lady Day.
And they all got together and do it. But those kids that are maintaining and staying with their faith, they lived liturgically in their home. Yeah. And they all have some. And it's not incredibly hard. It doesn't require you to do all the cutesy things. You just, I just wish
it becomes a lifestyle.
Yes.
The lifestyle is that your life is centered around the liturgy and the liturgical year.
Yes. And if they knew that is,
Yeah, so beautiful. And that's something else where you and I have bonded with through the years since our kids were little. This is the liturgical living, yes. Because we've been doing it since before it was the buzzword. Yes. So we feel very strongly, the two of us do, about bringing the life of the liturgical year into the home. It really is. It transforms a family, and it's not hard. It doesn't need to be, and that's what we would love to. You and I, in our own ways, want to see that happen in people's lives and have this movement happen because we've seen the difference it's made in our families, and we want other families to experience that.
Right.
So beautiful. And it's fun.
It's fun. It's fun. And I think people get
Very
overwhelmed, but I'm like, don't.
No.
It can be so simple. But if you
Absolutely.
are centering your domestic church around the life of the church, the rest will just come. Yeah.
Yeah, so beautiful. Is there anything else that you would like to add about CGS or anything before we close up the show? Any thoughts that you've had?
I don't. It is so important. I think it's worth all the effort that it puts into it. And if you are starting it, or if you are in the process of, it's just beginning and you have level 1, I just want to give a big shout out to how critical your team is. It takes a whole team of people. So it's easy for me to say, yeah, we have it at our pastorate. We have 22 atriums a week and 232 kids. It's in our school. It's in our parishes. But that isn't possible without the 25 other men and women who have stood up and said, I'll be trained. I'll assist. I'll clean your atriums. I shouldn't say mine. They're not mine. I always say all the time. They're yours. What can I do to help? Without them, it falls. So definitely build it on a foundation of a team, and it will keep going, and it will seem light. The burden will seem light with a team.
Yeah, Jodi, thank you so much. I just love to see the way you light up when you're talking CGS, or you're just in the building with CGS. I see you at church light up. And so I thank you for the just all the wisdom and the knowledge and the education you've given us in this show about CGS. And I would just really encourage people to pray about it too. Pray continually for all of the programs that are in existence. If your parish has it, continue to pray about it. And if the Lord is tapping you on the shoulder, go to someone that's, part of the program, a catechist or the director of it. Ask them, can I do anything to help? But especially pray for it. And if you want it at your own parish, or you want it for your child, pray if that's the Lord's will, that he's going to bring that into your life as soon as possible. So thank you so much, Jodi. We'll be praying for Catechesis with Good Shepherd in our pastorate, but everywhere else for it to just spread and just be able to touch so many young hearts and families' lives.
Amen.
Yeah. We'll see you next time, friends.
Thanks for joining us today. Remember to like, subscribe, and share Living Lit, and reach out with topics you'd like tackled at livinglit@sfcatholic.org. And be the light, shine the light, share the light, and live lit.